I was 23 years old the night I watched Bruce Lee dismantle everything I thought I understood about power, and I've carried the weight of that secret for 58 years because the man who lost that fight asked me to wait until he was gone before I told anyone what really happened. Harold Big Swede Magnuson died 3 months ago in a nursing home outside Seattle, and with his passing went the last reason to keep silent about the 4 seconds that changed not just his life, but the trajectory of everyone who witnessed what unfolded in that warehouse on October 12, 1967. Only 7 people saw what I'm about to describe, and 4 of them are dead now, taking their versions of the truth into whatever comes next. But Harold made me promise something specific before the cancer took his voice completely. He gripped my hand with what little strength remained in those massive fingers that once bent steel bars for bar bets and said I had to tell people exactly what Bruce Lee showed him that night, because the lesson wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who mistakes size for strength, muscle for mastery, or the appearance of power for the real thing. The warehouse district of Oakland's waterfront had a particular quality of darkness in those days, before the city decided that industrial zones needed streetlights and security measures. Warehouse 14 sat 3 blocks from the Port of Oakland's main shipping channels, close enough that you could hear the low moan of cargo ship horns cutting through the fog that rolled in every October evening like clockwork. The building itself had been a textile import facility until the company folded in 1963, leaving behind 12,000 square feet of open floor space with concrete so old it had developed that particular patina where decades of oil stains and chemical spills create patterns that look almost intentional. 20-foot ceilings held rows of industrial fixtures that barely worked anymore, maybe 1 bulb in 3 still functional, creating pools of yellow light separated by expanses of shadow deep enough to hide a grown man. The air inside carried that specific industrial smell of old concrete mixed with metal corrosion, a scent that coated your throat when you breathed deeply, making you aware of decades of use compressed into present moment. Somewhere in the building's depths, water dripped with metronomic regularity, each drop echoing against hard surfaces until the sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The temperature had dropped with sunset, not dramatically, but enough that breath was just starting to become visible in the patches of light, creating small clouds that dissipated slowly in the still air. The floor showed evidence of James Lee's training sessions, scuff marks from pivoting feet creating circular patterns in the dust, a few dark patches where someone had sweated enough to temporarily stain the concrete. I worked as a junior instructor at Ed Parker's Kenpo studio in Pasadena, young enough to think I knew everything about fighting and old enough to have taken enough beatings to suspect I might be wrong. Ed had sent me to Oakland with a message for Bruce Lee, who was teaching Jun Fan Gung Fu out of a small space in Chinatown, though calling it teaching undersold what he was actually doing. Bruce was building something that didn't have a name yet, taking apart traditional martial arts like a watchmaker disassembling a clock to understand how each piece actually functioned versus how people claimed it functioned. The message I carried was Ed's invitation to a tournament he was organizing. Nothing particularly urgent, which is why Ed trusted a kid like me to deliver it rather than picking up a telephone. I found Bruce at the warehouse that Wednesday night because his student James Lee kept a key to the place and had been using it as a supplementary training space when the regular school got too crowded. James had mentioned it to Ed during their last phone call, noting that Bruce liked the emptiness, the way sounds echoed differently than in a traditional kwoon, how the concrete floor provided honest feedback about balance and footwork that wooden floors sometimes obscured. I arrived around 8:30, parking my Ford Galaxy next to 2 other vehicles in the gravel lot that surrounded the building, a cherry red Chevy Nova I later learned belonged to James, and a massive Dodge Power Wagon that looked like it could haul a small mountain. The side entrance James had described stood slightly ajar, enough that I could hear voices from inside, one of them rising in volume with that particular quality men develop when they're trying to intimidate someone into backing down without actually fighting. I pushed through the door carefully, adjusting to the dim interior light, and found myself looking at a scene that would have been comical if the tension in the air hadn't been so thick you could almost taste it. Bruce Lee stood in the center of one of those pools of yellow light, wearing black cotton pants and a white t-shirt, hands relaxed at his sides, his weight distributed so evenly between both feet that he looked like he might simply float away if gravity released its hold. His face carried that expression I would come to recognize over the years as his thinking face, analytical and present, but somehow distant, like he was observing the situation from multiple angles simultaneously, while everyone else only saw it from where they stood. 12 feet away, consuming considerably more of the available light, stood what could only be described as an avalanche that had learned to walk upright. Harold Magnuson was 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighed, as I would learn precisely later that evening, 323 pounds. His shoulders were broader than most door frames, his chest thick enough that his arms hung away from his body at angles that made him look perpetually ready to grapple. His head was square and solid, like something carved from a single block of Swedish granite, with a jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically to absorb punches without registering damage. Blonde hair, cut military short, framed a face that was handsome in that particular Scandinavian way, where every feature seemed engineered for maximum efficiency rather than aesthetic flourish. Harold wore gray sweatpants and a white tank top that revealed arms the size of normal human legs, each muscle group clearly defined despite the overall mass, evidence of serious training rather than simple genetic blessing. His hands were enormous, fingers as thick as shotgun shells, knuckles scarred from what I assumed were years of wrestling matches, and whatever else men that size did when they needed to prove dominance. A small crowd had gathered in the shadows at the warehouse perimeter, 6 other people whose faces I couldn't quite distinguish in the poor light, but whose posture suggested they were simultaneously fascinated and uncomfortable with whatever was unfolding. James Lee stood off to one side, looking like a man who had just watched his dinner party turn into a hostage situation. He was a stocky, powerful man himself, respected in Oakland's martial arts community, but even he seemed diminished by the sheer presence of Harold's bulk. When James spotted me in the doorway, his eyes carried a message somewhere between relief and warning, though I couldn't determine which emotion was winning. The big Swede was talking, his voice carrying that particular timbre men develop when they're used to being the loudest thing in any room. "I'm telling you this for your own good, little man. You don't understand how wrestling works. I've put down guys 250 pounds like they were children. I've snapped arms that didn't want to tap out. Hell, I've made grown men cry just from pressure alone, no strikes needed." He shifted his weight, and the concrete floor actually transmitted a slight tremor I could feel through my shoes. "I'm not trying to disrespect what you do, but you're talking about fighting like it's some kind of dance or philosophy class. Fighting is simple. The bigger, stronger man wins. Physics don't care about your fancy kicks." Bruce's response came quiet enough that Harold had to stop talking to hear it, a tactical choice I would recognize only years later as deliberate de-escalation through volume control. "You're describing force application within specific rule sets. Wrestling has many limitations that street fighting does not. In your sport, there are no strikes to throat, no eye attacks, no groin strikes, no manipulation of small joints. You are very skilled at controlling opponents within these boundaries, but combat without boundaries requires different understanding." Harold laughed, a big rolling sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. "Boundaries? You think some little tap to the throat is going to stop me from getting my hands on you? You're what, 130, soaking wet? Maybe 140 if you had a big lunch? I could snap you in half before you got one of those little kicks off?" He held up his hands, spreading those massive fingers. "These hands have choked out guys who could bench press 400 pounds. What do you think happens when I get them around that skinny neck of yours?" I watched Bruce's jaw tighten, a microscopic adjustment most people would miss, but I had spent enough time around serious martial artists to recognize when the quality of attention in a room changes. The air seemed to compress slightly, like barometric pressure dropping before a storm. Bruce's breathing pattern shifted into something deeper and more rhythmic, his spine lengthening by perhaps an inch as his weight settled more completely into his stance. His eyes, which had been observational, became penetrating in a way that made Harold actually blink and shift backward half a step before catching himself. "You believe your experience in wrestling has prepared you for all forms of combat," Bruce said, and his voice had acquired a new quality, harder but somehow quieter simultaneously. "This is an honest mistake that many specialists make. The wrestler believes grappling is ultimate, the boxer believes striking is ultimate, the judoka believes throwing is ultimate. But reality of fighting is adaptation and completeness. You are very strong, this is true, but strength without speed is target. Size without mobility is disadvantage. Power without precision is waste." Harold's face flushed red, a color that started at his collar and spread upward like someone had opened a valve. "Are you calling me slow? You think because you can do some little kung fu movie stuff that you're actually faster than a man who's been training since he was 6 years old? He stepped forward, closing the distance between them to perhaps 8 feet. I've wrestled Division I NCAA, placed 4th at Nationals my senior year. I've been in the ring with Olympic-level grapplers, and you're telling me I don't understand fighting because I'm big? I am saying that your understanding of fighting is shaped by environment where certain techniques are not permitted and where opponents agree to specific engagement terms, Bruce replied. This is sport. Sport is wonderful for building skill within parameters. But street fight has no referee, no rules, no mats to protect you when you fall. In street fight, size can be disadvantaged because big man has more mass that must be moved, more targets that can be attacked, more leverage points that can be exploited. The big Swede's laugh this time carried less humor and more challenge. You want to test that theory? Because I'm standing right here, and you keep talking about what you could do, like it's all theoretical. Put your little hands on me. Try to move this mass. Try to attack these targets. I'm giving you the first shot, free and clear. Come on, show me this magic kung fu that beats 320 pounds of trained wrestler. James Lee stepped forward quickly, his hands raised in a peacekeeping gesture. Harold, nobody needs to demonstrate anything. Bruce wasn't disrespecting your training. He's just explaining different contexts for different methods. He looked at Bruce with pleading eyes. We should all just calm down and maybe continue this conversation another time when everyone's had a chance to cool off. But Bruce's expression had shifted into something I would later understand as resigned acceptance. The look of a man who has tried patience and reason and found them insufficient for the moment's needs. If demonstration is only way to create understanding, then we demonstrate, he said quietly. But before we begin, I need everyone here to witness something. James, please confirm what I'm about to say. James nodded slowly, unhappy but compliant. Harold believes that his size and strength make him superior in combat. He has said he could snap me in half. He has questioned whether strikes to vital areas would be effective against his mass. He has challenged me to prove my understanding of fighting. Bruce looked around at the small crowd that had materialized more fully now as eyes adjusted to the light. I counted 7 of us total witnessing this, including myself. I want everyone to hear me say this clearly. I will not injure Harold. I will show him why his assumptions about size and strength are incomplete, but I will not damage him permanently. This is demonstration, not fight to death. Harold, do you agree to these terms? The big Swede laughed again, but uncertainty had crept into the sound. I'm not afraid of you hurting me, little man. You agree not to sue me when I put you on the ground and you can't get up? Because I'm 3 times your size, and when I take you down, it's going to hurt. I accept full responsibility for what happens to my body, Bruce said. Now, one more question before we begin. You have trained wrestling for how many years? 21 years, Harold said, and pride had returned to his voice. Since I was 6 years old, my dad was a wrestler. His dad was a wrestler. It's in my blood. And you have size, strength, and technical skill developed over 2 decades of serious training, Bruce continued. This is a formidable combination. Most people would be very foolish to challenge you. Damn right. But you have never fought someone like me. What happened next unfolded across 4 seconds of real time that somehow contained more information than entire hours of normal existence, as if time itself had been stretched thin enough to see through to some underlying structure usually hidden by the speed at which moments pass. Phase 1 began with Bruce's forward movement, and the movement itself defied the assumptions everyone in that warehouse carried about how human bodies navigate space. There was no preparatory tensing, no weight shift backward before the forward explosion, no telegraph through shoulders or hips that fighting experience teaches you to watch for. One instant he stood 12 feet away in a state of relaxed readiness. The next instant he had closed half that distance while Harold was still processing that movement had occurred at all. The speed wasn't the cartoonish blur of cinema, but rather the unsettling precision of something that has bypassed normal mechanical stages of motion, like watching film with frames removed so that position A and position C exist without position B ever appearing. Harold's eyes widened fractionally, his pupils dilating as his sympathetic nervous system flooded his body with adrenaline in response to the sudden proximity of potential threat. His breathing pattern changed from the deep, confident breaths of a man in control to shorter, sharper inhalations through the nose as his body prepared for explosive action. The muscles in his jaw clenched, visible even through the thickness of his face as his entire body tensed in preparation for engagement. This was the moment where Harold's wrestling instincts and training were supposed to take over, where 2 decades of conditioning would translate into automatic, effective response. His arms came up in a defensive frame designed to prevent upper body strikes while maintaining position to shoot for a takedown, his stance widening to lower his center of gravity from its already substantial height, his weight shifting to the balls of his feet to enable explosive forward drive or lateral movement. His hands formed into that characteristic wrestler's claw position, fingers spread and ready to grip, control, and manipulate an opponent's body. His elbows stayed tight to his ribcage, protecting his torso while his forearms created a barrier that could deflect or absorb incoming strikes. These were textbook responses born from thousands of hours of training, exactly what any competent grappling coach would want to see, mechanical perfection developed through endless repetition. They were also completely inadequate for what Bruce Lee had become through his own thousands of hours of something that transcended style-specific training. Phase 2 manifested as Bruce's lead hand extended in what appeared to be a standard jab toward Harold's face, the trajectory and chamber angle suggesting nothing unusual, the speed impressive but not superhuman. Harold's arms rose to parry exactly as his training dictated, his massive forearms coming up to deflect the incoming strike away from his head, his weight already beginning to shift forward in preparation for the counterattack that every wrestler knows follows successful defense. His eyes tracked the incoming hand, his head beginning to slip slightly to the left to create additional defensive angle, his entire body responding as a cohesive unit trained to see strikes as opportunities rather than threats. But the jab was pure illusion, a feint executed with such commitment that it appeared real until the final microsecond when it vanished like smoke and reappeared as a palm strike driving toward Harold's solar plexus with entirely different energy and intention. Bruce's hand rotated from fist to open palm in the final 2 inches of travel, the heel of his palm making contact with the precise point where Harold's sternum ended and his abdominal muscles began, that vulnerable spot where the diaphragm attaches to the rib cage and where a properly timed strike can create involuntary spasm that temporarily paralyzes breathing. The sound of impact was like someone dropping a thick book on a wooden table, a sharp crack that echoed in the warehouse space and made everyone watching understand that something significant had just occurred. Harold's breath exploded out of him in a surprised grunt, his mouth opening involuntarily as his diaphragm contracted against his conscious will, his forward motion arresting instantly as every system in his body focused on the suddenly urgent problem of not being able to breathe. The strike had carried perhaps 8 inches of actual travel distance, but had somehow transmitted force that rippled through the big man's entire torso, disrupting his structure in ways his size should have prevented, like dropping a stone into still water and watching the waves spread outward in perfect concentric circles. Harold's face went from confident aggression to shocked recognition in less than a second, his expression cycling through confusion, surprise, and the beginning of panic as his diaphragm refused to respond to his commands to breathe. His hands, which had been raised in defensive position, dropped slightly as his body's automatic systems overrode conscious control, prioritizing the breathing emergency over maintaining guard. This was the moment where most fighters would retreat, create space, try to recover, and reset. Harold's training took him in the opposite direction. Phase 3 saw Harold's wrestling instincts taking over with impressive automatic response speed, despite the breathing compromise. If his diaphragm wasn't cooperating, he would use his reach advantage and superior mass to clinch, get his arms around this smaller opponent, use his weight to drive forward and down, return to familiar territory where size mattered more than speed and where he could use his body to control Bruce's body until his breathing recovered. His arms shot forward in a bear hug attempt that should have been impossible to avoid given the speed of execution, the length of those massive limbs, and Bruce's current proximity. The movement was textbook, combining speed with commitment, using his forward momentum to close the remaining distance between them while his arms spread wide to engulf and capture. Bruce's response involved no backward motion at all, no retreat that would have signaled defensive mindset or fear of the clinch. Instead, he moved laterally 4 inches, a distance so minimal it seemed barely enough to matter, a shift so small that at normal speed it would have been invisible to anyone not specifically watching for it. But those 4 inches, executed with perfect timing relative to Harold's committed attack, placed Bruce outside the closing circle of Harold's arms, while keeping him close enough that the big man's forward momentum worked against his own balance. The principle was pure economy, using the minimum movement necessary to achieve the desired result, wasting nothing on excessive motion or dramatic positioning. As Harold's arms closed on empty air where Bruce had been a fraction of a second earlier, his face registered confusion that bordered on disbelief. Wrestling training had taught him to expect resistance, to feel the contact and weight of an opponent, to begin the complex process of control and manipulation that came from successful clinch. Instead, he felt nothing, his 323 pounds of muscle and bone committed to grabbing emptiness, his center of gravity now outside his base because he had lunged forward, expecting to make contact that would help support his weight. His momentum carried him forward another 6 inches, his arms still spread wide, his head now extended beyond the line of his feet, his entire structure compromised by the absence of expected resistance. Phase 4 began as Bruce's right hand traveled upward in a path that terminated at the underside of Harold's jaw, not with a strike that would have caused immediate damage, but with a push that utilized the wrestler's own forward energy to snap his head backward and elevate his chin toward the ceiling. The hand placement was surgical in its precision, the heel of Bruce's palm making contact with that specific point where the jaw connects to the skull, where pushing upward creates maximum leverage for head manipulation. The force wasn't brutal, but it was perfectly timed, arriving at exactly the moment when Harold's neck muscles were relaxed because his attention was focused on his failed grip attempt, creating a situation where his own body weight and momentum were turned against him through simple mechanical advantage. Harold's head snapped back hard enough that his vision momentarily starred, his inner ear registering the rapid change in head position and sending confused signals about which direction was up. His hands, which had been extended for the grab, now scrambled for purchase as his body recognized it was falling, despite his conscious mind still processing what was happening. The technical principle at work was leverage multiplication, using an opponent's committed movement and body weight against them. But the execution was so clean and economical that it looked almost supernatural, as if Bruce had simply suggested that Harold fall, and Harold's body had agreed before his mind could object. Harold's massive frame, all 323 pounds of muscle and bone, and trained athletic capability, pivoted backward on his heels as his center of gravity shifted outside his base. His arms windmilled briefly, searching for balance that had already been stolen, his hands grasping at air with the desperation of a man who suddenly understands he is in serious danger. His eyes went wide with the recognition that he was falling despite having initiated the attack, despite his size advantage, despite his training, despite everything he thought he understood about how fighting worked. The expression on his face in that moment was something I would never forget, a mixture of shock, confusion, and the beginning of real fear as his assumptions about physical combat shattered in real time. Phase 5 manifested as Bruce's left foot hooked behind Harold's right ankle, at precisely the moment the big man's weight was entirely committed backward, and his balance was already compromised beyond recovery. The foot placement required perfect timing and positioning, Bruce's body in exactly the right location relative to Harold's shifting center of mass, his weight distributed such that he could maintain his own stability while contributing to Harold's instability. What had begun as a controlled fall now became acceleration toward the concrete floor that Harold's wrestling training had not prepared him for, because wrestling occurred on padded mats designed to absorb impact and protect athletes from the consequences of throws and takedowns. Time seemed to compress and expand simultaneously in the final second before impact, Harold's body rotating backward through space with increasing velocity, his arms still reaching for something to grab or break his fall, his face registering the terrifying realization that 320 pounds of human body was about to hit unforgiving concrete from a height of 6.5 feet with nothing to cushion the blow.